Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writer's Lunch. Today we have Rachel Abbott and Marilyn Leiter. Did I say your name right, Marilyn?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. We have them. They're the hosts of the Houston Public Library podcast, and they're here to talk to us a little bit about editing your own writing. We had Nano just finished. Hooray. If any of you did it, if you won, if you participated, congratulations. And so now that you have your 50,000 word dump, we're going to learn about actually doing something with it and editing it after you've got it. So welcome, Rachel. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting us, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Rachel, did you want to start the slideshow?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having us today, Sean. This is very exciting. Rachel and I have just been kind of freaked out in a good way, like a really happy way that you have invited us to this. So we're from Houston Public Library, and today we are going to share some advice on self-editing before you share it with other folks. Oh, also, it's up to you, but you may wish to have a pen and paper, pencil and paper, suit yourself handy because we might have a little activity later. So just have that in your mind.
Thank you guys so much for coming on, Marilyn and Rachel. I know Marilyn from the Heights Library and Rachel works down in the Southeast. Was it Mancuso? That's your library there, Rachel?
Yes, yeah, I work at the Mancuso Library, not far from the Hobby Airport. So if any of you are on the southeast side, come see me.
Yay.
Heck yeah. And we're very happy to welcome them. Also, this is going to be the topic for one of their podcasts, which is debuting in January, fingers crossed, called Write On. And you can find that on the Houston Public Library website. Don't need to sign in or even have an account for it. You should be able to still look up their podcasts. But we always encourage you guys to use the library, get a library card, and see the awesome things that they have there, both in person and being able to check out things online, ebooks, comics, audiobooks, absolutely.
So quick little fun fact, small aside, I had my engagement pictures taken at the downtown Houston Public Library.
At the Idison building?
No, not the Idson building, the actual.
The library itself?
Yeah, the library.
The
That's
Idson building is beautiful if you ever have a chance to see, but it's very old school. Daphne went for the modernist 80s aesthetic with that, absolutely.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that would make sense with the Central Library downtown. Very 70s, 80s brutalist architecture.
Well, the pictures turned out beautiful anyway, so.
Oh, I believe it.
Point. Yeah. Also a plug for your using library resources. I think it's called it depends on the year that it comes out, but there's the 2020, 2021 writers, I want to say it's the writers manual handbook. There's a writer's handbook that's all about publishers. And I'm totally blanking on the specific title, but Sean, I can forward it to you afterwards, and then maybe you can distribute it likewise. But
oh, please,
anyway.
Absolutely. And we can put it on you can put it on the events when people go to look for this online, absolutely. I've just tossed the Houston Library's website, houstonlibrary.org, up into the chat there. And I'm going to mute for a second because my dogs are very loud.
Aw. All right, y'all. Rachel, would you like to hop over onto the next slide, please?
Yeah, here we go. Well, can I? Haha, yes.
There we are. Okay, so who we are, just real quick. My name is Marilyn Leiter. I am a library service specialist at the local Heights Neighborhood Library. And just real quick about me, I am from California, originally Carlsbad, California. I've been here since 2013, and I am writing a novel. It's a Western in an alternate universe. And the premise is it's in this Western of sorts. There's a young woman who is grappling with her complicated past against this backdrop of a post-colonial war and an ecological disaster. So there's a lot happening in it. And Rachel, do you want to talk about yourself real quick?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Rachel. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. I am a local through and through. I work at the Mancuso Neighborhood Library, as I said earlier, as a senior library service specialist. And I'm also working on a novel right now. It was my Nano project last year. Did not get to do Nano this year due to life, but I'm still going to finish it. And it is a queer fantasy novel about a woman who has magical powers in a society where any sort of magical ability is heavily controlled by the government. So it's got a little bit of heisty rogue things, a little bit of magic, a little bit of high fantasy. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to finish it one day.
For sure. All right. So this is going to be our upcoming podcast, Right On with HPL, as in Houston Public Library, HPL. So it's a podcast we're aiming at especially for young adult writers, but anyone obviously is welcome to listen in. I believe they're going to release it to like all the main like podcasting streaming platforms. So just stay tuned, but you can always check the website. I think if they haven't yet, they're going to start mentioning it on the website very soon, and it will premiere. Last we heard, it's going to premiere in January 2022. So Rachel and I both work for Houston Public Library, right? And that is how we met. And so just a little bit more about the podcast aimed at young adult writers. This first season, kind of the couple main things that we're focusing on is training your writing mindset to be resilient, to work with the things that you might struggle with in yourself and not against your struggles, but to embrace them as challenges. And then we do focus a bit more on writing fiction, the craft of writing fiction in this first season. And then the last episode of season 1 that we are currently in the middle of drafting, fittingly, is how to self-edit your own work. So, which we're excited about. And then season 2, fingers crossed, we are going to incorporate interviews with poets, because we really want to be able to have, the voices of poets on the podcast. And then we're going to, in season 2, also branch out on how to share your work with a larger world, with other writers and with reviewers and readers. Talk about writers' workshops, talk about writers' groups. So we're very excited about this project as it continues to unfold, and we hope that you might listen in with us.
All right, so getting into the topic of today's little meeting, as we said earlier, we're talking about editing and revising. And a lot of times when we talk about those two, we use those words interchangeably, but there actually is a difference. So editing is how you resolve sentence level issues. That's going to be punctuation, grammar, word choice. This is especially relevant for those of you who just finished NaNoWriMo, because as you know, you're doing those sprints, you're trying to beat the other people who are sprinting with you or finish your thought before that timer goes off. And the grammar gets crazy. So that's what editing is for. And as you might guess, it's a faster process. Whereas revising deals with your work as a whole. That's how you develop your characters, how you consider the strengths and weaknesses of your story. You clarify your ideas. You might rearrange things, add new scenes, take away whole scenes, all of that good stuff that takes much longer as in a more involved process. So today we're talking about self-editing, mainly focusing on those sentence level issues, since revising is very particular to everyone's individual piece that they're working on. Mm-hmm. And self-editing is basically just editing and superficially revising your writing before you share your piece with someone else. And Marilyn, do you want to talk about why we self-edit?
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, so editing helps the people that you would like to, the first audience, first few folks that you're going to share it with. It will help direct them to focus on the essentials of your work, the things that you really want feedback on, the core content of your story, not so much like the minor things. Like Rachel and I do consider like the technical aspects of grammar and formatting and punctuation to be more on the minor side of things, because you're not writing a story so much about grammar and punctuation and formatting. You're writing a story. And so this will help guide your audience, your first reviewers, to really focus on that more of the revision process than the than the editing process. And so I have a story on why this is kind of a passion project for me. Back in January 2020, before the pandemic happened, I joined it was in person then, a writers group here in Houston. It was my first night attending the group, and I was really excited. And overall, I still think it was a valuable experience. But the first presenter of the night, this guy had written a story. I think it was just the first chapter. I don't remember quite all he planned to do with it. But the premise was in some rural town of Texas, it's nighttime. I think it was nighttime. And the narrator gets a knock on the door. And he opens it. And who is it of all people? It's the ancient Greek poet Homer, who's knocking on his door. And the two strike up a conversation. And Homer starts talking about Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance thinkers. And so anyway, that was the premise, right? Time travel, Texas, Greece, Italy, just all these different people. And so, however, the poor presenter did not clean up grammar, punctuation, formatting. And so it was kind of a hairy read. And there were roughly 20 of us in the room, and in a circle, sitting in a circle. And one by one, almost all 20 people in the room, as you know, we all had copies to mark up. The feedback was repetitive. These different listeners, for the most part, said, "Oh, well, I have to agree with so-and-so right next to me. You really should have polished up your grammar before sharing this with us. You really should have marked up you should have cleaned this up more." And so they kept saying the same thing over and over to this poor guy. Well, by the time it got to me, I was so fed up with the same thing being said to this poor man that I decided to focus on his premise, on his core content. I'm interested in time travel. I like the Greeks, I like the Renaissance, and so I wanted to see more finessing, some more nuance, some more development of how is it that Homer knows something about Leonardo da Vinci and they're in Texas. I just wanted to know more about that, and so that's what I focused on. However, this poor presenter was just so devastated by the general barrage of criticism that the next several weeks of us meeting, I never saw him again. And I just feel really bad for him that he was so daunted by the criticism that he got. When his ideas weren't so bad, but if he had taken more time to clean them up and kind of prepare for what was coming his way, he could have really avoided some heartache that came to him that night. So that is the case I make for self-editing. So
let me throw this out there, Marilyn, for sure, just to say, because like something that I did when I recently was going back to look over something, I realized that in 2 paragraphs, I had switched from present tense to past tense. And it is annoying to go back and change every single verb, but you gotta change that ED to S, like just one little thing like that in a situation like you're talking about before presenting to somebody else, just that's one example of something to look for. And if anybody else has anything to throw out that they've had in their experience, maybe spelling the word gray the English way throughout an entire piece, and then deciding that you needed to put GREY instead, which is another one.
I know that it can feel a little like, I think you make a really important point, and it can feel a little wasteful to be like, well, what's the point of going back and editing all this stuff if I'm gonna like rewrite stuff and have to edit it all over again? But if you're distracting your reader, then that's no good. You really do want them to be able to focus instead of saying, well, you used the word suddenly 4 times in this paragraph.
Right. And that's kind of those writers group and reviewer situations were one of the first things that Marilyn and I talked about when we were developing our podcast, because we'd both been in writers groups before. We had taken creative writing workshops, and how to give and receive feedback is so important, and something that can be very difficult if you're not prepared for it. And it's something that you want to, be as resilient as you can going in. So that was one of the first things we discussed when we were talking about what our own writing journeys have been like. And it's something we hope to talk about more in season 2. But at first, we just want to talk about, how do you make a character? How do you make a plot? That kind of stuff that's more fun and better for discussion.
Oh, y'all are putting it together. You got to start somewhere. Absolutely. Let me ask as well, JC, do you have an example, something like this that you've seen? Yeah.
I've been in a couple writing groups, and it can get tricky. Like I said in the chat, I was in one where they just started focusing on repeated words. And it wasn't like, oh, you use this word like 3 times in a row in the same paragraph. It was more like, you use this word a lot over your 5,000 word story. It was like, at one point it was annoying. It was like, I was describing a room. What other word is there for wall? Tell me and I'll use it. But yeah, it was like stop focusing on what could be done better about the story as overall, and started focusing on little pickish kind of things that is not helpful. And it's like everyone is saying right now, it's like, if you're going to give critique, the critique should, yes, if grammar's horrible, say, hey, you might work on the grammar, but don't focus on it. Focus on critiquing the story, the characters. And the big one you should really try to do anytime you critique someone is tell them, start with things you did like. And that's the one thing I think a lot of people miss. It's like, hey, I liked it when you did this. I liked it when you did that. And then get into the critique you have after that. And I think a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah. I do have a question for you guys. Since that was a critique group that you went to multiple times, did you have the same concern that the people in that particular group were only focusing on grammar or over focusing on grammar to the detriment of the actual critique itself? Or was this for this particular person because their mechanical writing was too difficult to understand what was going on for the majority of the group?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So I did go to this group for the next several months, and I noticed that the more successful writers and those who'd been in the group for some time who were presenting over the next several sessions that I attended would start as soon as everyone had settled in with their paper copies to mark up, the presenter would say, before we begin, these are the things that I'm looking for feedback on. These are the specific things that I want to hear about. And so they were, for the most part, that really put in the listeners' heads that we needed to focus on these specific things. And for the most part, that was able to guide the feedback. And so it really improved it. And so I would say that it's I don't know if this quite answers your question, but if the group it's an imperfect group. They're very human. We were all human. But I think there is that inclination for sure in some groups to zero in on the technical aspects and missing the core content. So as Rachel and I will discuss in season 2, but just, to mention it here as well, if you do attend a group or you're looking for feedback from anyone, maybe just state at the start as you're handing it to them, these are the things that I want to hear feedback on. You might feel free to comment on other stuff, but this is really what I'm invested in how to develop and how to, further my story along. Does that help?
Absolutely, Marilyn. And let me throw this forward for sure, because we had spoken about this in the lead up to coming on Writers Lunch and all. And writers groups are totally, like another ball of wax. Absolutely. We could put that on the schedule, Daphne and Shannon, for something coming up. But for the moment, we are working on self-editing. So what do you do before you show it to anybody else? Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, next slide, Rachel, please.
Yeah. Let's get back to it. When should you self-edit? We highly recommend taking a break between your writing and your editing and revising. And I know that can be hard, especially when you're coming down from a big event like NaNoWriMo, where you've just spent you've built up this really strong habit of writing, and now you're ready to get to the next part and you want to polish everything up. But we do want to encourage you to take some time, maybe a couple of days between finishing your story and then jumping into the next phase, because you need to get a little distance from it. When you've been, head to the keyboard working on it for so long, it can be very difficult to get to a point where you can look at it more objectively. And B, when you get away from your keyboard or your pen and paper, your typewriter, or whatever you're writing on, and you go listen to new music or watch a movie, talk with your friends, walk the dog, whatever it is you do to decompress, you are giving your mind new experiences and helping yourself create new descriptions, giving yourself new perspective on the same story that you've been working on. So as this cute puppy and kitty are doing, give yourself some time to rest. Don't feel like you need to rush right into the editing and revising process. Take a step back before you move on.
Mm-hmm.
And let me check the chat here. Yeah, no, don't query the book you wrote in November and December. That's not gonna give you any good feedback from agents or publishers or anything like that.
An agent, Nano's been around for over 10 years, so agents and editors are on the lookout for that. When they open it up and they're like, oh boy, someone should have proofread this, boom, done. And you don't get a good look. You don't, put yourself out there in the best way that you can. Take your time, enjoy the holidays, and then take another look at your work.
Yes, and definitely best not to query without having another pair of eyes go over it. But you don't want to waste that pair of eyes, which is why you self-edit.
Exactly. Absolutely. Right. And Marilyn is going to talk about what the process of self-editing could look like. Maybe it's stuff you already know. Maybe it'll give you some new ideas of how to go over your work differently. So let me get to the next slide.
Yeah. All right. So, suit yourself. But Rachel and I really do make the case to please. And we know, some of y'all want to save the trees. Just please print your work, your draft on paper. Print it out. Grab your favorite pen. Rachel's favorite color is red. Mine is purple. And read every word out loud. Please read every word out loud. Years ago, I attended a graduate program application seminar, right? How to get into grad school, how to write the application letter, to persuade professors and so forth. And the presenter at this seminar talked about a poor applicant who who intended to type the word exotic and instead typed erotic, and spell check did not catch it because erotic is a perfectly good English word. Yeah, so spell check might not think anything of it, but if you read every word, you're going to catch it, y'all. So there are some folks out there who do make use of text-to-speech software. I think Microsoft Word does that, where it will read it back to you. But if you read it in your own words, read it with your own voice, that we recommend it. We strongly recommend it. And so with your colorful pen, you're reading out loud, you're going to mark up grammar issues, awkward phrasing, etc. as you go through it. And we'll go into a bit more of this process. But only go back to your computer after you've thoroughly marked up the full thing. So that's really what we're recommending as a general overview.
I say this, I finished Nano one time and then I sent it over to copy.com and just got, all those pages printed out. I like doing things on paper and, just like really doing that. A lot of people just keep it on the computer, but it's a way to take it out of your focus, and look at it in a new way. So I'm gonna recommend putting on paper, but that's just me.
I've done both. I've written a lot of words in in this lifetime. And I can reliably say that for me, printing it out makes a huge difference in what I'm able to catch and in how I'm able to improve the story. Get to the next slide. So this is some of the stuff that you look for when you're going through that process. Of course, punctuation, grammar, active versus passive voice. We've talked about that. I want to beat a dead horse. But go over those things and look for things like what Marilyn was talking about, where it's not technically wrong. Erotic is a word, but is that what you were wanting to talk about in your graduate school application? Maybe. Depends on what you're studying. But I also want to make the case that reading out loud is really helpful for word choice and tightening up your prose. Because as you're reading, you get into a flow of things. And that's what makes really good prose, right? When those words are just perfectly chosen and they flow like water and it's beautiful. And it's hard to get a sense of that when you're just reading silently in your head on a computer screen. But when you print and read it out loud, that's when you start picking up on those tiny little things where you could improve a word here or take out an adjective there and just smooth out that entire paragraph. So that's another reason that I recommend the print and read out loud thing. I think it does make a big difference when it comes to the quality of your prose. And of course, we have this quote down here that is commonly attributed to Pablo Picasso. Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. We have talked now pretty extensively about the value of good grammar and punctuation and active versus passive voice, etc. But there are incredible writers who break those rules to good effect. And what you're looking for when you're self-editing is making sure you're being intentional when you break those rules or when you go in a different form. It needs to be intentionally chosen and done to good effect. You know, think of like Cormac McCarthy. He hardly uses any commas. Or think about Hemingway and the way that he has very spare prose, very minimalist writing. These are things that might not work for everyone, but when they're done intentionally and well, it can be beautiful. And that brings us to a little activity that we wanted everyone to take part in to talk about writing and revising and learning from other writers who are incredible at what they do. So take it away, Marilyn.
Alrighty. Okay, so I mentioned the pen and paper. Just real quick, an intro to this little activity is what I call the feedback loop. But the feedback loop itself depends on a prior process that Rachel and I talk about in in the podcast, which is something that I learned in a poetry writing workshop. This twofold process of picking a master teacher, or plural, master teachers, master writers that you can learn from, and then comparing and contrasting your draft with their polished, published work, and comparing and contrasting the two, and then you edit and revise accordingly and match it again with theirs. And so you're growing alongside their finished work. And so an example, picking master teachers is, I find it very helpful because I'm thinking about who can influence my writing, who can shape my writing. My writing is still from me. It will still have my unique voice and my style, but I can still pick up the moves that these master writers are making. And so after I've you can just pick one, you can pick a couple, depends on what your piece needs at the different points of your plot or the structure. And so once you've picked your master writer, we can then hop into the feedback loop. So I wrote an example. This is the rough draft of just a sample. It's not anything from my story, but it's just something that I came up with. So I'll read it. It's what would be, what needs some help, what needs some love. Ariadne did not like sports, and she hated tennis. She lived in Austin and loved cats and painting. Last month, she turned 24. She dreamed of visiting Paris before she was 30. Okay, so you can pop it into the chat. or I suppose, or you could unmute yourself, but let's discuss real quick how might this little passage be strengthened? What could we do for some problem solving here? And if none of y'all want to participate, that's okay. Rachel and I still have stuff to go.
Yeah. We got a couple asks over the top. Luca, let's go there. What do you think, man?
Above all else, show, don't tell.
Absolutely.
In order to improve
Awesome.
this, we have to ask, do we really need to know all this information right out of the gate? Most likely, if this information is important, we will learn about it when we need to.
For sure. It is an action-packed passage. I totally agree of like giving the reader some breathing room and spreading this out. But I was still hoping with the passage of just popping some real details in there, but still hoping to finesse them somehow. So thank you so much for that. Anyone else?
I see JC has his hand raised. Do you want to tell us what you think about this little snippet about Ariadne?
The big thing that comes out to me is flow, and it feels out of order. So some of these sentences feel like they should be in different places following one another. And because of that, I feel that it could be cleaned up a little bit better. But I don't have a problem with the information being put here, especially if it's important to what's going to happen next. So if this is a preloading for maybe she wins a trip to Paris or something, maybe this information is important to see right now. But the big one is the flow and the order feels off.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that she lived in Austin has nothing to do with the cats and the painting, but the cats and the painting can kind of go along with the sports because we're talking about her likes and dislikes. Or maybe the fact that she lived in Austin or like lived in Austin her whole life has something to do with wanting to go to Paris before she gets older.
Yeah, they're all pretty straightforward declarative sentences, and they're all roughly the same length. I think varying the sentence length would help.
Yeah, these are awesome thoughts. Does anyone else want to? Anyone else?
Yeah. Why doesn't she like sports? Why does she hate tennis? Does she have tennis elbow? Was she the best player on the team or the worst player on the team? Was she the first one picked or the last one picked?
Right?
Yeah. You're telling me this is the way it is, and we don't know why.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Very frustrating. Okay.
All right, so next we have an example of another opening line that gives a lot of information, but it's in a very different way. So we're going to think about that feedback loop with master writers. And our excerpt is from a book Marilyn loves called News of the World by Paulette Giles.
All right, so just real, I'm going to read it. I promise I'm going to read it, and then I'll say just a little bit about it, and then we can discuss. Okay, so I'll begin. Wichita Falls, Texas, winter 1870. Captain Kidd laid out the Boston Morning Journal on the lectern and began to read the article on the 15th Amendment. He had been born in 1798, and the third war of his lifetime had ended 5 years ago, and he hoped never to see another. But now the news of the world aged him more than time itself. Still, he stayed his rounds, even during the cold spring rains. News of the World, Paulette Giles, page 1. All right, so these are the opening lines. These are the opening lines of this novel. And I really did enjoy this novel. It helped that these lines were at the opening when I flipped it open and tried to find something for us to work with for this presentation. But I find these lines, well, we can open it for discussion. I will say about commas, she does not use as many commas as some other writers might. But I still think there's the voice of the character. I will simply say, I think the voice of the character works with fewer commas. She's also participating in kind of that line of writers like McCarthy and I want to say Faulkner, who use fewer commas than other folks. But if you want to critique the commas, that's okay too. But we can now open this for discussion. How does this compare to the passage with Ariadne? Do you have any thoughts on this passage from News of the World of itself?
I think this one flows better. I think a lot of the information still begs the question of why do we care? Where are you going with this? And it's a variety of information.
Cormac McCarthy influenced for sure. And varying the sentence length. I do like that. Is this page one, like this is how the novel opens?
Yep, the first couple lines of it.
All right, I don't like that, but anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't grab her.
I thought about adding like the next couple of lines, but then I'm like, nah, I don't want to keep reading.
All of a sudden, it's a book club.
When you flip open a book in the store and, just like read the first couple of lines, it can be really shocking how, some are effective and some aren't. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know if I like it. I do agree the flow is better, but it still feels a little stilted to me. But I would have to see how the rest of the book is. And I have read a book before where the information was just hammered out, a lot of quick, snappy sentences, and it took a second to get into the flow of that. So it might just be that. I'm just not into the flow of the story right now, so it's not popping at me, but yeah.
The only sentence in this paragraph that has a feel for the period is the last one. Stayed his rounds. It feels like an old-timey phrase to an extent. The rest of it is too modern. It doesn't quite fit.
For me, what drew me in, there were a couple of things that drew me in. I was intrigued by the fact that he goes by Captain Kidd, a military title, but then we learned that it's been several wars now across his lifetime, and he hoped never to see another war, but he still goes by this military title. What's that all about? And then for him, and so the premise is that he goes around different towns reading the news. I promise it gets more exciting than that. But why, if the News of the World title of the book is heavy and it wears at him, it wears him down, why does he still keep doing it? Still, he stayed his rounds even during the cold spring rains. So I felt like, okay, maybe he has a resilience. Maybe there's something in this that gives meaning back to him, but what is it? So for me, at least, I was drawn in by these opening lines because they had me asking more questions that I felt were promised to unfold over the course of the story. So that was why I picked these lines, but it is still up for debate, of course.
Okay, and the next thing we wanted to do, the activity, is kind of tie those two together, and we would like y'all to write or rewrite the description of Ariadne, thinking about a writer that you love, or thinking about your own style, thinking about how other writers work and what impacts you and what draws you in. And then we're hoping that some of y'all could share what you had written and what you had done. So Marilyn has an example of a rewritten description that is based on News of the World, trying to emulate that style and that tone. And we'd like to see what else you guys might come up with. Thank you for stopping by, Luca. It was nice to meet you. And yeah, so I was just going to set a timer for 2 minutes just to see what we can come up with and give people a chance to share and kind of do a quick little writing exercise midday. Would y'all prefer to be on this screen, or do you want to see the description of Ariadne again?
I was going to ask if you could flip back to that.
Absolutely. Let me. Okay, So here's a description of Ariadne, the details that we've been given so far. I'm going to set a timer starting now for 2 minutes, and we'll see y'all back here. All right, 2 minutes are done. Thank you for indulging our little writing exercise. I see that Sean already sent his in, which I'm excited about. Anyone else welcome to share or read aloud?
I'm that jerk overachiever who was trying to like write it while you guys were talking about News of the Wild.
You knew what was coming. That's okay. That's okay.
I'll share mine if you want.
Yeah.
Yes, I would love for people to share what they've written and what inspired them while they were writing, if you had a particular writer in mind.
Okay. Well, I felt pretty constrained by what was there already, but I embellished a little.
That's okay.
24-year-old Ariadne did not like sports, but especially hated tennis. As a lover of painting, she dreamed of visiting Paris before she turned 30. However, now she is tied to Austin with her 2 cats.
Yeah, you varied. The sentence structure is more varied. There's more intrigue.
Stronger verbs stuck out to me in that there's a lot more emotional undertone in the prose chosen rather than very simple like this. Ariadne does this.
Yeah.
Who else would like to share? Let's see.
I'd be willing to read what I wrote.
I would love that, please.
Yeah. First, how do you pronounce this person's name?
Ariadne.
Oh, Ariadne's fingers jerked at yet another bolt of pain in her elbow. Her fracking tennis elbow. Oh, you'll love this sport, coach had said. We are not like those tribal football players, he had said. Purr, said her cats, rubbing on her legs. That's as far as I got.
Awesome. Oh my, gosh, and I'm already cringing at little things that I typed wrong because I was doing it fast. And I changed her name to Adrienne. Adrienne dreamed of visiting Paris before she turned 30, but she cringed realizing that last month she had already turned 24. As she looked around her apartment filled with half-finished paintings and discarded Whataburger bags, the monotony of her life crushed down on her. A tennis racket, still in its pink packaging, was a sharp reminder of the many ways she had tried to change her life before, at 19, at 21, last month. One day she might leave Austin. One day her life might bloom open as she wished it would, but not today.
Yeah. There's just so much, the Whataburger bags, like, I mean, so there's some humor in this, but also like, we're just trying to wonder, like, what is holding her back, you know? So you're putting questions in her minds.
I'm wondering, you know, what did she try to change at 19? What was it at 21? What is this repeated pattern of attempting to break out of the mold and then failing? It's interesting. It's really good. I love it. I love when you guys share your writing. I'm having such a good time. Would anyone else like to read aloud?
I can do mine.
Yes, I love it.
Okay. Ariadne hated sports and loathed tennis. It was something her mother could never understand, still dragging her daughter along to weekly matches. Ariadne much preferred painting. There was a romance to it. She dreamed of being one of those French painters with her easel and a cigarette looking over a river. She'd lived in Austin for all 24 years of her life, but she dreamed of visiting Paris before she turned 30. And as I'm reading this, I'm also self-editing and being like, I used dreamed twice in that paragraph, and I really didn't need to.
Something I also really enjoyed is seeing how people can take the same details and make the tone totally different. You know, we've had like wistful and humorous and annoyed, you know, it's just, I love writing. I love hearing from other writers. I'm having a good time. Thank y'all for having us. Okay.
It's hard to transition from tennis to geographic location and painting. So if this was my story, I would split that up and put those things in places that are more relevant.
Right. Those details could span like a whole chapter if you were doing them in a different way.
To get some breathing room in for the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not a perfect example, but I am still really appreciating what you guys have done to run with it so far. So thank you for that.
I love the idea of her being like all wistful for Paris while she's in the middle of a like tennis match.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so this is how I reread it. Again, not a perfect rewrite by any means, but this is what I wrote. Ariadne turned 24 just last month, and her dream of visiting Paris before turning 30 was beginning to haunt her. Would she ever make it out of debt to the City of Lights? Would she ever make it past Austin's outskirts? Ariadne's 2 cats and her dabbling in the world of canvas and paintbrushes consoled her less and less by the day. Meanwhile, the rest of her family went off to football games, basketball playoffs, and tennis courts to roar their enthusiasm for athletic brutality. They would never understand her, and she reciprocated. So I did add some details, but also, some of y'all added details as well to try to, pull the reader in a bit more and to ask more questions and to add just a little bit more context. So feel free to, still go after this and like tear it to pieces. But this is how I rewrote that first sample.
And again, I don't think anyone here is going to take those details and think, I think I'll write a book about this Ariadne that hates tennis now. It's more just an exercise in how you can think differently about your work and how you can revise something that you've already written to be more interesting and to have more meaning and excitement in it. All right, so just a couple final tips, and then we wanted to open it up for discussion. You should always approach your own writing with respect as well as humility. Too often as writers, we fall on one end or the other of the spectrum, and sometimes both in the same sentence, like, I am a genius and this is amazing, or I have written a pile of garbage and it should be deleted immediately. But when you're editing and revising, you want to approach it somewhere in between with the belief that your writing is a diamond in the rough, that it's worth pursuing and it's worth refining, and that you just need to put in a little extra work to get it there. Of course, I'm going to say it again, take a break between writing and editing, give yourself time to breathe and to come back to your story with a clean slate. And going back to what we were saying earlier about the difficulties that you can have with writing group or writing workshop groups, self-assessment is going to lead to a well-grounded opinion of your own work. A well-grounded opinion is going to give you greater resilience, and that resilience will enable you to handle the critiques that come your way and know what advice from your reviewers is good advice and know what doesn't totally match up with your vision of your story, so that you can make it your own and turn your writing into something beautiful. So now we wanted to open it up. Does anyone out there have a revising or editing tip that's really worked for you? Do y'all have any questions or comments?
Yeah.
Okay. So one editing tip that I've seen before is to read your scenes out of order. Sometimes as writers, we're also readers and we can get sucked into our own stories. So when you break that flow, you can focus a little bit more on the like grammar and structure of it.
And the plot, that's a great thing to think of as chapters are standalones. Even if, like it's supposed to flow together, you need information from the others. They should each be able to stand on their own in case somebody reads a chapter and then puts it away and comes back to it.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, this wouldn't work as well with a novel unless you're really, really dedicated. But in a short story workshop, I had a professor recommend taking your story and cutting up each paragraph and thinking about the order that you present information. Does this flashback need to happen here? Would it be more impactful to reveal this information later down the line? Are you leaving your readers hanging and wondering what's going on for too long and you need to move that reveal sooner in the story? Rethinking the structure like that, again, I don't think I would do that with a novel because that would be really difficult, but maybe just a chapter at a time here or there, thinking about how you present things and what order information needs to come in to be the most impactful to your reader. Does anyone else have revising or editing advice they want to share? I'm going to write these tips down and use them myself, so please do.
Well, I'm a glorified high school dropout, so I can't trust myself on the English and grammar. I leave that to editing programs and then whoever I choose to edit after that. But when I do my editing, yeah, I try to read it out loud, but I do sometimes have to have someone take a second look because attention deficit hyperactivity brain kicks in and it makes sense to me and it doesn't always make sense to somebody else. And I understand what I wrote because I wrote it. So sometimes, yes, having someone else having a second look-see helps clarify information. So sometimes I always ask if they got lost because I want to know if they understood what was going on and if they got lost, and getting that information, trying to not explaining it. That's the other thing. The thing you want to do is, well, it's because this is, you got to shut yourself up and go, no, okay, they got lost for a reason. Why did they get lost? It makes sense to me because I wrote it. Let's examine where the problem might be. And sometimes that's hard to do, is shutting yourself up because you want to explain or defend your story, and understanding they're not exactly attacking you. They're just, if you ask them for help, they're trying to be helpful.
Yeah, I do the same thing. And when I give a beta reader a copy, I at the end, I put a list of characters and identify who they are. And I alert them to that when I hand out the copy. But then I tell them, if they refer to that, tell me why and when you did that. When did you lose track of the characters?
That's a great idea, especially with longer works. You know, you work on the same piece for so long, you could name every character in your book forwards and backwards, but for a first-time reader, being able to keep track of all of those characters from first page to last can really help you figure out if you have too many characters, if you're overinflating your story, or if you're leaving characters out of important moments that they really should be in. Yeah, beta readers are invaluable. They're incredible.
Yeah.
Writing that synopsis, and if we're talking about self-editing before getting to showing it to other people, sometimes, you know, when you go back to do your edit, you might want to write a synopsis, do your editing, and see if they match up. You know, are you actually doing what you feel like you're doing? Because if you turn around after that second read through and write a synopsis again without looking at the first one, then you definitely might be able to see, oh, this is what I meant to do, and this is what I actually did. The one time I did a few years ago, a NaNoWriMo one, and I wrote 50K, did like 15 at the end in another month, and thought, okay, this is a completed novel. And I turn around and read it, and I'm like, I wrote 2/3. You know, it's like right up to the climax, and then just chop, which absolutely is a film thing where they will end, you know, a story like right as it stops right there, but not too often in books. Absolutely.
So I apologize. I had to run because of my baby. But one of the things that I like to do when editing is kind of follow David Mamet's corollary. And if you guys don't know what that is, it's like 3 rules essentially in every scene, which is, you know, who wants what happens if they don't get it, essentially, like, and why now? So if you're like looking at something, where is the pressure coming from? What are the stakes? What makes this something that they have to have a conversation about right now? Like, why can't it wait? Because that helps really draw out your character's motivations and helps reveal things to you that maybe you hadn't really fully thought out and realized yet that you can add into that scene. But also because if you're reading through and you're like, I don't know why they're doing this, then your reader's not going to know either.
Mm-hmm.
I could look this up, but what's the name of the tool where you feed in your work and it gives you all the word counts for all the words in it?
You're talking about AutoCrit?
Or like a word cloud where it shows what words you use the most in bigger font?
Well, not really. The one I was thinking of just lists them all. It lists them in order of frequency.
I
There's an option in
I
Scrivener that'll do that. I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking of.
Which one, Shannon?
There's an option in Scrivener that allows you to do that, but there's probably other like word counting tools out there too.
Okay.
I use AutoCrit and I really like it. But what it does is, for instance, if you're writing fantasy and you like Brandon Sanderson, you can compare your work to his and it will score you accordingly. It does that with a lot of best-selling authors, or you can generalize it just like to a specific genre. But included in that tool is picking up adverbs, showing versus telling, repetitive words. So it's not just how many times did you use this word in this chapter. It's like, oh, you use this word 3 times repeatedly, fairly close to each other. And then you can highlight those and then go back and look. So it's not necessarily, do you want to rewrite, but it gives you the option to look at what it's telling you and say, oh no, it's wrong, it's fine. Or maybe see it and go back and make some changes.
Yeah.
But I like it. It breaks everything down and you can work in sections. So you say, okay, I'm just going to focus on adverbs in this chapter. And then after that, it's like, okay, now that adverbs is done, we're going to move over to showing versus telling. Now that's done, we're going to move over, and you can work on each independent thing so it's not as daunting.
That's cool. I've always seen advertisements for AutoCrit do like during Nano, but I've never spoken to someone who actually used it.
I use it, and I think they're running a special right now where it's basically half price for the year. But like I said, you can, I think, get a trial program to see if you like it. And they do have a simplified version that you can use for free, but I pay for it. And like I said, it works. And it's little stuff you don't think about that it catches too.
That's really interesting.
But like I said, some of it's like, hey, this is what the problem is. You go, no, that's fine. And ignore it and move on.
Right.
Well, cool.
They
Thank
do.
you guys. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, they do, like, every now and then they'll do what's the score. And because if they add a new author like Brandon Sanderson, they did an episode where they scored Brandon Sanderson's latest work to his own scoring system within the program. So they do that too. So I mean,
oh, that's so fun.
Watching one of those might give you a good idea of how it works and if you'd like it.
But as always, it is practice, practice, practice. And it is important to say that because it takes so much more time than a magic bullet, but one does not exist for writing that I know of, at least. But we're happy to have Rachel and Marilyn here, who have their magic gun loaded with bullets to help you solve your writing conundrums with their brand new podcast that is going to be starting in January, and that is Right On. There's also a Houston Public Library podcast going on now that I believe is called First Chapters, where somebody reads. Yeah.
It's the first chapter of different middle grade and YA novels. So if y'all are a fan of middle grade or YA like I am as a children's librarian, it's a lot of fun. You can get a little sample of a lot of different books that way. And that's on all of the podcast streaming things.
Mm-hmm.
Heck yeah. Oh my, well, thank you guys so much for coming on. We absolutely appreciate it. Heck yeah. And great little activity. That was awesome in the middle of it to do a little bit of editing as we're talking about editing. Absolutely. If I can say, we have next week Miranda Ramirez coming to give a talk. She is now a fellow at Sam Houston University, I believe, in the creative writing graduate department. And so she has been working on her academic chops as well as being a punk rock literati by being the editor of Defunct magazine. But yes, next week, Thursday, 1 o'clock, we're happy to welcome Miranda Ramirez, and check out our Facebook pages, Houston Independent Authors. If you want to join a group of authors, make sure to answer the questions. Otherwise, we don't know. And Writer's Lunch on Facebook as well. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone. Have a great
you.
rest of your day.